Hello and welcome to the Ross and Cromarty Citizens Advice Bureau Rights Here, Rights Now podcast. Today I'm joined by Simon Lee, who is a solicitor at the Civil Legal Assistance Office for the Highlands and Islands, which is based in Inverness. Thank you so much for joining me today, Simon.
Hi, Emily.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Civil Legal Assistance Office does, and we're also going to discuss legal aid. So we're going to cover different types of legal aid, things you can get legal aid for, and how eligibility for legal aid is worked out. So Simon, can you start off by just telling me a little bit about what the Civil Legal Assistance Office does and how you operate?
Sure. The Civil Legal Assistance Office, we're a network of solicitors' offices been set up by the Scottish Legal Aid Board under legal provisions that allow them to employ solicitors that provide direct client-facing services. We only offer services to clients who are eligible for civil legal assistance, and we can provide civil legal assistance and representation to people with particular types of legal issues only. There's 3 offices in our network, one in Inverness, which covers the Highland and Islands area of Scotland. There's one in Aberdeen, which covers Aberdeen and the Shire, and our Edinburgh office covers Edinburgh and the Lothians. As you said, Emily, I'm based in the Highlands and Islands office in Inverness. Here we undertake work primarily in several different areas, mainly though housing, mental health, adults with incapacity, and child law.
Great. So quite a broad spectrum of things that you cover at the office then.
Yeah, it's quite a diverse caseload, to say the least.
So just moving on to legal aid, am I right in thinking that there's actually 3 different types of legal aid?
There's 3 different categories of legal aid. So there's criminal, civil, and children's legal aid. Obviously, given our name, Civil Legal Assistance Office undertake work in the civil side of things, which also does cover children's legal aid. Here in Highlands and Islands, we obviously cover both civil and children's, as this office does undertake work under child law. Both of these categories of the civil legal aid have 2 different types. So there's what we would call legal aid and legal aid advice and assistance. So for civil, that would be civil legal aid and civil legal advice and assistance. And for children's, it's called children's legal aid and children's legal aid advice and assistance. The legal aid side is used for court work, and advice and assistance covers meetings with clients to give advice and assist them with any matters that fall within the area that we're advising on under Scots law.
Okay, so just to clarify, so there's the 3 different categories. There's criminal, civil, and children's, and yourselves at the Civil Legal Assistance Office, you cover civil and children's. And in each of those categories, there's 2 different types. So there's the legal aid, which maybe is what people more traditionally think of, which involves kind of court work. And then there's the advice and assistance part, which is more about, client meetings and giving advice directly to clients.
Yes, obviously advice and assistance is the first kind of legal aid that you'd be signed up for, because that covers the initial meeting and sort of the preparatory work, particularly to make the legal aid application. Civil legal aid or children's legal aid covers the court work that stems from that. And obviously our Highlands and Islands office and Aberdeen office cover both civil and children's. Down in Edinburgh, the Lothians, they only undertake certain kinds of work under civil legal aid, as they don't do any child law down there.
Okay. And what kinds of matters do you get legal aid for?
Whew. Quite a few different things. So if we're talking about civil legal aid, it covers quite a broad range of categories. It's both for family and non-family cases, and it's to both pursue and defend court actions. It runs from everything from divorces to appeals, and even appeals as far as the Supreme Court. I think it's fair to say that civil legal aid covers most kinds of cases in the Scottish civil courts. Obviously, not all of them fall within our remit here at Clough.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of matter does children's legal aid cover then?
Children's legal aid is much narrower. So for the legal aid side, for children's legal aid, that simply covers the court proceedings in the Sheriff Court, which are associated to the children's hearing system. So children's legal aid covers work undertaken in the children's hearing system. The advice and assistance is for the actual children's hearings. Children's legal aid itself covers work that goes to the Sheriff Court or any sort of appeal work that may go further than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, quite a broad spectrum of things that legal aid can cover, and I'm sure you get clients with all sorts of different issues coming to the Civil Legal Assistance Office all the time.
Yeah, whether or not they fall within our core work is the difficulty, but yes, we do get lots of different people approaching us with lots of different legal problems.
So how do you work out if someone is entitled to legal aid?
Well, obviously it depends which kind of legal aid we're assessing. So if we're looking at advice and assistance, it's actually relatively straightforward. If they're in receipt of a passported benefit, so that's one that can be verified with the Department of Work and Pensions. Nowadays, that's universal credit, income-related employment support allowance, income-based job seekers allowance, or income support. Then there's no income assessment done for advice and assistance. However, we still have to make sure that they meet the disposable capital threshold, which is £1,716. That calculation is relatively straightforward to do. However, if the client isn't in receipt of passported benefit, then we have to do a disposable income calculation. And in terms of obviously income, it means income from all sources, and that also is covering the client's partner if they reside with them. When we're looking at advice and assistance, it looks at quite a small period as well. It looks at the 7 days leading up to and including the date of the application, which is the date usually of the meeting with the solicitor when the form's signed. You deduct various things from the income that's calculated, so tax, national insurance, etc. And then you deduct certain allowances which are in what we call a key card. So there's every year it's updated by the Legal Aid Board, and there's certain deductions which are made for spouses and dependent children. And once you've done that, you come up with what's called the disposable income. And there's a similar calculation done for capital where certain amounts are deducted from any savings in the bank. And that has to even be done if they're in receipt of a passported benefit. More often than not, I would say that most of the clients that come to us don't have a lot of savings, so it's not a problem, but it does crop up now and again. When it comes to legal aid, the assessment is broadly speaking similar. However, it's the Scottish Legal Aid Board that undertakes the calculation. They calculate disposable income and disposable capital. Again, if there's a passported benefit, then the financial calculation is somewhat short-circuited in a way. However, they do obviously want to double check matters, particularly in terms of capital as such. They do take into consideration, though, on the legal aid assessment, certain costs which are deducted, for example, rent, mortgage, maintenance paid to children. These are not taken into consideration when calculating advice and assistance, unfortunately, as the calculation is much more straightforward.
Okay, so for the advice and assistance sort of side of things, that calculation, would that be done by yourselves at the Civil Legal Assistance Office when somebody comes in to see you?
Yeah, it's done by the solicitor when they're signing a client up for advice and assistance. The first part of the process is to confirm their eligibility.
So there's a few things to take into consideration. So whether they have a passported benefit and then look at their disposable income, but there's also, as you said, a threshold for disposable capital. So you mentioned the number 1,716. So if someone had over that amount in disposable capital, would that then make them ineligible for advice and assistance?
Yes, it would make them unfortunately ineligible for
so
advice.
That's sort of your benchmark number that you need to work from.
Yeah, it's the magic disposable capital number.
magic number. And as you mentioned, there are allowances and deductions for things like dependent children. So there are some things that are considered. And when it comes to legal aid, that's an application that goes to the legal aid board themselves, and they have a slightly broader range of considerations that they look at when determining eligibility.
Yes, the legal aid board undertake the assessments in terms of civil legal aid, and in terms of the eligibility, they look at matters in more detail. Obviously, it could be that someone is employed, and then they would have to unfortunately complete a financial form, which gathers a lot of the information which the board require. They'd also have to provide things like 3-month bank statements and the last 3 pay slips that they've received. All of these things are obviously taken into consideration in terms of legal aid. As I said, they do look at outgoings as well when they're looking at legal aid. So it's they've produced forms which capture all the data they require, and then it's obviously looked at by the board in terms of their assessments.
Okay, so I guess we've just to clarify. So for advice and assistance, bar sort of particular allowances for spouses or dependent children, outgoings are not taken into consideration. But when it comes to civil legal aid, the legal aid board have a kind of broader range of things that they look at. So outgoings might be considered in their calculations.
Yes, that's correct. It's certain outgoings are considered for civil legal aid.
And there's a particular form and as you said, evidence, for example, pay slips and bank statements that need to be submitted. Would an application to the legal aid board, would that be something that you would assist clients to do?
The application itself is submitted by the solicitor.
Okay.
On what's called the Legal Aid Online portal. So yes, we do assist the clients. Obviously, they have to complete the paperwork because there's certain declarations on there, and that states that what they're submitting is the truth. So therefore, it's up to them to complete. But yes, we gather the information, and it's preferable that it's then uploaded by ourselves. There is options for providing the financial form to and the bank statements direct to the board. However, we find that it's much easier to upload it ourselves, because then we make sure that things are where they need to be timelessly, because there are time limits often on providing these documents.
Okay, so you're sort of there with people to help them through the process and make sure that they've got the evidence that they need.
Yes.
So if it's determined that somebody is eligible for advice and assistance or legal aid, would they still have to pay something towards their legal fees?
That depends on the financial assessment that's undertaken. For advice and assistance, if they're not on a passported benefit and we're doing an income calculation, if the income, once all of the deductions are applied, falls between £105 and £245 a week, as the calculation is done on weekly income there, they'll have to pay a fixed contribution towards legal aid advice and assistance. Broadly speaking, it starts at £105, and it increases by about, I think it's £7 now per band, and it's divided up. So there's bands between £105 and £245, where the income obviously increases, I think, by £7 roughly. In terms of civil legal aid, they may also have to pay a calculation if the board calculates either on income or capital. If they have an income between £3,521 and £26,239, currently, as those figures do change, or at least reviewed annually, then they'll have to pay a contribution. It's usually collected in instalments of up to 48 monthly payments, and the board are quite good at making sure that it's not impacting too much on the applicant. It depends after calculation how much it will be. It can be 33, 50 or 100% of the case costs. For capital, it's a difference between how much capital you have as calculated, and the lowest capital contribution limit is currently 7,853. So if you have less than the lower limit, there's no contribution under capital. Similarly, if your disposable income is under the £3,521, no contribution either. As I said, the disposable income is calculated after the board look at incomings and outgoings. If it's done from capital, it's usually expected, unfortunately, to be paid in a lump sum because the board obviously see that you have the capital there.
Okay. So just to go over that again. So if your income is over the amount of 3,521, you would have to pay a contribution based on that income, which is usually done in an installment so that it's not a huge chunk of money disappearing from your bank account at once. And that's on a sort of banded scale depending on where your income comes in.
Yeah, it's on a banded scale, so it's either roughly a third, half, or 100% of the case cost, and the case cost is fixed by the legal aid board when the application is made. For the different kinds of legal aid applications, so for the different categories, there's different associated initial case costs.
Mm-hmm.
However, obviously, if the cost is looking like it's going to go over that limit, then the solicitor would advise you of that, and it's likely that we'll be seeking what's called an increase, so that the cost limit is increased to encompass what we think the cost of the work is going to be.
And there might also be some money to pay back depending on how much capital that you have. So if you have capital over 7,853, again there'd be a sum that you might be due to pay depending on how far over that amount you're sort of sitting, and that one could be paid in a lump sum because it's assumed that you have that capital available.
Yes, that's correct. It would likely be in a lump sum, and I think if I get this right, it's the case. So, for example, if you had £17,000 assessed capital and your case cost limit was £3,000, it's likely you'd be expected to pay the entire lump sum, I think. But obviously, if it's less than that, say you've got a cost limit of 3,000 and you've got £1,000 over the disposable capital, then it's likely that you just pay the £1,000.
Okay. And if someone was maybe having a look themselves just to try and work out whether they might be eligible, where would you suggest they go to find information on that?
There's eligibility assessment estimators that are on the Scottish Legal Aid Board website that are relatively good in terms of giving you a rough idea about whether you're eligible.
Yeah, and obviously yourselves at the Civil Legal Assistance Office, you will help someone to work out and make their applications if that's what needs to happen as well.
Yes, yeah, that's any solicitor when making an application for legal aid, including ourselves, will be able to assist if we're looking at taking on a new client. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So just to mention, so the link for the address that you've mentioned there, so for the Scottish Legal Aid Board website for the estimators, it's www.slab.org.uk /new to legal aid /eligibility estimators. And it's fairly easy to find if you just Google Scottish Legal Aid Board. It's one of the first things that comes up. So we've talked quite a lot about the sort of financial considerations when determining whether someone's eligible for legal aid. But is there a merits test when looking at the cases or the matters that people have come to you with?
Yes, I mean, the merits test is applied by the Legal Aid Board for civil legal aid. Mm-hmm. The merits test doesn't apply to advice and assistance. In terms of the merits test, it's actually sort of two tests. The first one is looking at whether or not the case has a sound legal basis. And obviously, as a solicitor, we give advice about this before making the application. The second test is that it has to be reasonable for legal aid to be granted. I think this is the reasonable test, which is often mentioned. And it considers all the facts and circumstances of the case and looks at things like whether it's premature to raise proceedings. So the board do like to see, in most cases anyway, that there's at least some settlement has been attempted. It's not appropriate for all cases. There's some cases where the board will accept that you can't negotiate matters. Also looks at whether your case has prospects of success and whether you have a good chance of being able to exercise the remedy effectively. So, for example, if you want to raise an action for payment against somebody who has no money and no prospects of ever paying that amount, it might not be reasonable for the Legal Aid Board to grant legal aid to raise that action. and each application is considered on its own facts and circumstances.
Okay, so again, just to clarify really, so for advice and assistance, there isn't a merits test. That would kind of purely be based on what the client needed and whether they met the financial criteria for legal aid. But if it was, or legal advice and assistance, should I say, but if it was to move on to the stage of requiring legal aid, perhaps that there was a need to go to court or to take things further, there would also be a merits test. So firstly, looking at whether there's a sound legal basis, and then looking on to whether it would be reasonable to take the action forward.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think we've really covered this already, but just to clarify for me, how do you go about applying for legal aid?
Legal aid obviously is applied by the solicitor. They have to be registered with the Legal Aid Board to be able to undertake the kind of legal aid that's being applied for. So, for example, a criminal registered practitioner is not able to make a civil legal aid application, and similarly, vice versa, a civil registered practitioner can't undertake criminal applications unless they're registered as well.
Okay, and is there anything else that you really feel that we should cover today, Simon?
I think simply I'd just like to remind everybody that's listening that on what the Civil Legal Assistance Office is able to do for them, and with the legal issues that we might be able to help them with, and also the fact that if we're not able to help, we may be able to help find other solicitor that might be able to help them. So even if they're, obviously your listeners are not sure if their case is something that we can help with, it's still worth getting in touch with us. We can offer referral and signposting services to those who contact us. If the case falls in our core area of work, we will consider whether or not we can carry out an initial appointment to assess on whether or not they will are eligible for advice and assistance or legal aid. We can offer referral and signposting services for cases that are both core work and not core work to us. If it's core we're not able to help, then we can provide a referral service to other solicitor firms who may be able to offer help under Scottish legal aid. If it's non-core work, then we offer signposting information on sources of help to whatever legal issue they might be facing. So the signposting information is tailored to the broad category that the person is approaching us with. If we can't help them, we can see if we can direct them to obviously people that can help, like yourselves, for example, at Ross and Cromarty CAB. Just also like to point out where our office is, and it's based in Inverness, next to the museum, just down on Bridge Street, just next to the townhouse. We can be contacted there by anybody if they want to drop in, or they can telephone us on 01463 641770. We also have a website with more detailed information on our services that we can offer, and the services that we can offer to advice agencies as well. The address is www.clao.org.uk.
That's fantastic. So I think that just about wraps us up for today. I hope that we've been able to provide a bit more clarity on how legal aid and advice and assistance works in practice. I would suggest to anybody that does have a legal issue that they're concerned about and they're not sure where to go. As you've said, the Civil Legal Assistance Office website details the kinds of work that you do, and the Scottish Legal Aid Board site gives you some information on legal aid and does have that kind of eligibility calculator to help you understand whether you might be eligible for legal aid. But certainly if you're unsure, you can get in touch with the Civil Legal Assistance Office and they'll be able to assist you. I'd just like to thank you very much for joining me today, Simon. I've certainly learned a lot about legal aid in the last half an hour. As always, if anybody has any topics that you would like us to discuss, you can send those to advisor@allnesscab.casonline.org.uk. We're happy to take any suggestions and anyone that you'd like us to speak to as well. So Simon, I think that's us for today. Again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really, really interesting to discuss legal aid, and I think that's us.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Emily.
Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Bye.